So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another one of these historical battle reenactments that's been given to me by Lord of Belagost. Another one which is a little bit more old school in terms of its styling. It certainly has a set defender, you would suggest, in the blue team today, and a set attacker in the red team, following on from the events of the historical battles we've already seen, seeing the Gondorian victories. This follows the events following that of the sister kingdom of Arnor splitting into the three petty kingdoms that we do see throughout Reforged on a rather regular basis: Cardolan, Arthedain and Rhudaur. Rhudaur, being influenced by the fell realm of Angmar to the north, want control over Weathertop so that they can control the Palantir that is also there. Argaleb, the king of Arthedain, as he is now, is going to march to meet them. I believe the actual battle for Weathertop is intended to take place after this. I believe this is where Argaleb the senior marches against Rhudaur and ultimately marches to his demise, and his son, Argaleb the junior, picks up his mantle to carry on the momentum. So realistically, I think if I'm reading this correctly, what we should be seeing here is a red team victory, but with the death of the central Arthedainian general. We'll see if that turns out to be the case, but we will go through the de facto attackers on this occasion, which is the forces of good, essentially, marching against the fell-influenced men of Rhudaur. Starting off with Cardolan, who more often than not do fall in line with perhaps the true, quote-unquote, inheritors of Arnor in the petty kingdom of Arthedain. Cardolan may be a little bit less sturdy than their slightly more northern brethren, and maybe a little bit more reliant on middlemen throughout their roster than the more Dunedain-centric Arnor, but they certainly have their qualities. Greenway Garrison archers are going to be actually fairly reasonable in a matchup against Rhudaur, purely because they will be able to skirmish reasonably happily. They're not going to be chewing into too much of the quality that Cardolan have, although being a scenario, of course, value for money on individual unit picks is less of a concern and you just sort of roll with what you've got. But they'll still be enough against the basic Rhudaur archers, certainly, and that's one area where the defenders on this occasion could come a little bit unstuck. Something else Cardolan can do is field a very reasonable front line. Minhiriath spearmen are perfectly serviceable, as many of the western kingdoms of men have their spearmen be. So solid enough from the front here, and then also folded into that we have some Greenway Garrison footmen, which of course a cheap and cheerful pikeman. Although all of the petty kingdoms of Arnor have got access to this kind of unit, Cardolan are certainly going to be leaning on them pretty heavily in this battle here with a joint spear and pike front line. The thing that really sets Cardolan apart among their brethren of Arnor is their crossbows. The other factions don't have access to crossbows at all, whereas Cardolan are one of the most crossbow-centric factions the game has to offer, and the Minhiriath sharpshooter is very central to this. Their trump card in many ways, in the sense that they have those armour-piercing maces in melee, are going to be less useful against Rhudaur than they would be against many other factions, but the sheer stopping power that the crossbows themselves have is really the key thing here. And Minhiriath archers as well, so a very ranged, focused Cardolan army, you'd have to say. They're going to be trading back and forth with their foe very efficiently, but it remains to be seen whether they actually have the infantry staying power to go toe-to-toe with, especially a damage-focused faction like Rhudaur. We have some Dunedain commanders on the flank. We have actually seen the Dunedain commanders somewhat recently, and it was on a battle for Amon Sul as well. This is maybe a little bit further away from Weathertop itself, but the Weather Hills, once again, as soon as I start recording, that's when my phone decides to be active. You hate to see it. But yeah, Dunedain commanders we saw in the battle for Amon Sul didn't be surprisingly effective given the somewhat lackluster nature of single HP cavalry in the game. We'll see on a more open map like this, it should be when they're actually a little bit stronger. At the back in the reserve we have some Greenway Garrison spearmen. Reasonably tough, but very, very poor at dishing out damage in melee to other units. Again, time will tell whether they have the stuff here to withstand an onslaught from Rhudaur. Cardolan. Hearthguard of Amon Sul really typify the ranged focus that Dawn's army here has. Especially the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, they'll be very comfortable skirmishing with basically everything Rhudaur have to offer unless they're in close enough range for their throwing projectiles to hit them. Minhiriath men-at-arms obviously offer a little bit more in close melee than the Minhiriath spears do in terms of overall damage. And then off to the flank we have some Greenway Garrison spearmen, and a little bit further back, perhaps a surprise contingent. Cardolan do have the Dunedain in their roster, not in the same numbers, but Dunedain captains certainly strong enough to cause a problem here. multiple HP swordsman, exactly the kind of unit Rhudaur do not like facing off against. Now then, moving on to one of the central Arthedainian armies, Fire Captain Les McBurney here, who has got some Arthedain men-at-arms and Arthedain pikemen in here. No armour upgrades to be seen, but a very similar outlay to the Cardolan frontline we've already seen, albeit with more of a swordsman focus to back up their pikes rather than the spears that Cardolan have in the first instance. There are some Dunedain peacekeepers in here, which will be a very effective unit against Rhudaur indeed. Those sort of high melee damage units are going to be very good against the more lightly armoured hillmen. So the Dunedain commanders could be a very effective unit here indeed. Again, a lot of cavalry, more so than the Cardolan army we've already seen, and Arthedain sergeants are a unit I don't think we've seen in forever and a day, because if you're going to bring single HP cavalry as Arthedain and you have a choice about it, it's going to be the Fornoster Rhine Knights, because you're not spending that much more in the grand scheme, and they do at least have the armour values and slightly better charge bonuses, all of which are going to be very useful. But Arthedain sergeants, can Fire Captain use them to a good effect? We shall have to wait and see. It's going to be difficult. Here are the Fornoster Rhine Knights. You can see the difference that they have. They have the full plate as opposed to just the chainmail and tabards. Some Evendim spearmen are in here as well without the armour upgrade. Militia spears we've already seen from Cardolan. The Arthedainian ones are slightly better, it must be said. So they will be up to a little bit more as the battle goes along. And then at the back over here, some dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights. We've already mentioned with the Dunedain Peacekeepers that high base damage melee infantry units are going to be the way to go if you want to do damage to Rhudaur, and this is exactly one of those kinds of units. And in behind them, the ranged contingent for this Arthedain army, Evendim Archers and Arthedain Marksmen. Similar archer outlay, it must be said, to the Cardolan force, albeit in lesser numbers. They've got more cavalry here, with Dunedain Mounted Company as well to try and counteract any Rhudaur cavalry that may be present, and dismounted Knights of Illuminus as well. They're a very defensive unit, maybe not the best kind of unit against Rhudaur, considering they do have the armour piercing to make somewhat quick work of them, but we shall have to wait and see. Moving on to Tintin, I think this is perhaps the army we should consider to be Agaleb's army himself, because this one looks to be a little bit more high quality, certainly in terms of the infantry that we're seeing. Plenty of Arthedain men-at-arms, no pikes to back them up, it must be said, so maybe having to be a little bit more mobile here, perhaps. We shall have to wait and see. Arthedain men-at-arms with Dunedain peacekeepers, again, very strong unit against the forces of Rhudaur. Arthedain marksmen, so plenty of basic archers here for the attackers, so they can set themselves up in a position, push with their infantry and support them with archers all day long. Rhudaur are going to have to be the creative ones here, I would suggest. Here are all the pikes, so not directly reinforcing the infantry, but they're so far away from the front line that they can be used as they wish. 3 units of Fornoster Rhine Knights, 2 units of Wardens of the North, and 1 unit of Dismounted Knights of Illuminus represents a huge Dunedain contingent in this army. Plenty of armour-piercing missiles as well, so if it turns into a slog, which is unlikely considering the shorter nature of this fight, then realistically it should be a red team victory here, but just bearing in mind that seeing as it is a somewhat shorter battle, perhaps the punch of Rhudaur's projectiles will be the key. And here is the Elven help, so the elves did get involved in all of these conflicts, of course, on the side of good, and it's going to be Lindon marching in step with them. 4 Lindon archers, more damage focused than the ones we've already seen, and that is going to be key here. Lindon's lower armour is more in step actually with the hillmen they're going to be facing off against today. The armour piercing of Rhudaur will also not be quite as good, so this is one of the better matchups for Lindon, who as it stands in this version of the game, still being the older one, not in the best of positions, certainly one of the more difficult factions to play. Not the worst faction in the game by any means, but certainly one that requires a little bit of finesse. Harlanden Guard have got a little bit more defensive nous to them with those shields, and just a little bit further back, Harlanden Infantry, 4 Lindon Pikemen representing that phalanx type front line that we've seen a few times now. 4 Lindon Marines are here also, Javelins and Spearmen combined. Javelins, of course, are a theatre of war that Lindon can at least contest with Rhudaur. They may not win that, but they can at least make life a little bit more awkward. This is where Rhudaur are going to struggle a little bit more though, this very high tier contingent back here. Mithlon Swordmasters are dangerous enough, but it's going to be the Noldorin units, which, yes, the armour piercing will come into play against them, but they've got such high base stats that Rhudaur are going to be wanting to focus them down, especially the mighty Blade Masters, and there's also some more Mithlond pikemen here at the back as well. Cavalry and chariots is interesting. So we've got some Mithlond Lancers, so javelins combined with more aggressive cavalry. Then the Mithlond Nobles, which among the chariots are one of the better ones because those javelin projectiles are very deadly. On an open field like this, can they do the business? We shall wait and see. Now then, for the de facto defenders, starting off with Diego Rio Ramos playing as Rhudaur. Arthedain Berserkers are here with their throwing projectiles and obviously very, very deadly armor piercing as well, but that's only going to be useful in certain engagements. Numbers are going to be key for Rhudaur in this sort of situation. They may be the defenders and maybe leaning a little bit more on quality, but it is an open battle, so numbers you're going to need to blanket the hillsides with them. And also as an evil faction, especially one like Rhudaur, they are more numbers centric in general, and Rhudaur swordsmen here in high numbers and Rhudaur axemen. I mean, one thing you would worry about with this amount of Rhudaur axemen is the archer presence that the red team have, because Rhudaur axemen may not be the most dangerous Rhudaur unit, but they're certainly easy to kill at long range, and if you deprive them of their numbers here, Rhudaur are almost assuredly going to struggle. Now then, we have plenty of cavalry as well. It looks like more than one unit of the Arthedain nobles, which is a dangerous thing to try and contend with for the red team here, considering the amount of cavalry they're going to have to use well. But it is the sort of theatre now that Rhudaur should be able to dominate if it comes down to just slamming cavalry together. They do need to be a little bit careful of stuff like the chariots and javelins and ranged assistance, because even though they are very tough, the Arthedain nobles, among knights they're actually somewhat fragile. We'll see how things go for them. Witch Realm Enslavers are another very dangerous unit for the attackers to consider just because of their extremely high levels of damage. Black Wolves are somewhat similar, though they're more fragile as a Berserker class unit. As soon as their hit points are gone, they will evaporate very, very quickly. More Black Wolves. We've got some Coldfell Maidens in here as well, just to help really reinforce the fact that Rhudaur are going to have a pretty gnarly cavalry force for the red team to have to deal with here. I can see plenty of half speed on the horizon. Rhudaur marksmen will allow them to contest the long range game, though not necessarily win it. But up closer, Ettenmoor's Troll Hunters and the Arthedain Berserkers we've already seen could be absolutely vital. There are some terrain features on this map, some cliffs, so Rhudaur will be wanting to make the battlefield a little bit smaller if they can help it. Lord of Belagost himself is the central Rhudaur army, so some Rhudaur marksmen on the front line again, just purely for contesting the long-range game with their enemy. We shall wait and see how they do. Rhudaur clansmen in behind with some Trollshaw axe throwers as well. So Rhudaur clansmen without the armour upgrade, but still solid, especially with those big shields, for trying to absorb that punishment that those enemy archers are clearly going to be trying to rain down upon Rhudaur. And then we also have the Trollshaw axe throwers, a very deadly unit. They're very savage with the amount of base damage that they're able to lay down. Can they do the business here? It really depends whether or not they can actually get into a position where they can throw their projectiles before getting shot up. At least the Ettenmoor's Troll Hunters do have those shields and that armour to help them out a little bit in that regard, though even that won't help them if the Wardens of the North get them in their sights. Plenty of Rhudaur swordsmen in behind the clansmen and the initial archers to help try and flood the front line when the enemy are finally upon them. Arthedain Rangers is an interesting one. I mean, Rangers are legendarily really the kings of getting the most kills in this version of the game with their body piercing, but on very open maps like this it's very difficult for them to replicate their performances in other situations, but we'll see. It's certainly not impossible, and if they can do the business, that could be a real difference maker. More Arthedain nobles, so that's another unit of knights, which, I mean, that's a big power spike. It may very well come down to how well they can utilise those units to see if they can change fate. Arthedain pikemen as well to help shore things up, and some Arthedain berserkers as well. So a high quality army, but unsurprising. It's an open battle and they are outnumbered, so they're going to need to lean on some of these quality units, Rhudaur, if they're to have a chance. And finally, 2 times over here, he has to make do with Dunman Hunters instead of Rhudaur marksmen, so slightly worse. And he's also facing off against Cardolan more directly, who've got a lot of projectiles to deal with, so they're certainly going to be more of a just throw some archers at the enemy and hope that they can distract them long enough for your melee units to do the business later on. Plenty of Rhudaur clansmen as well. They'll be reliant on those shields if Cardolan do decide to try and hit them up. And then we've also got some Arthedain pikemen as well. We've got some Rhudaur swordsmen in behind, so again this sort of layered defence, and it kind of needs to be, because if everything's all together in a blob, enemy projectiles are going to be a real problem. Catapult is an interesting one. This sort of artillery could be very, very useful for Rhudaur. They need to keep it clear of any cavalry. That is going to be absolutely vital if they are to have any success with it. Open battle like this is going to be more difficult for it to be the be-all and end-all, but again, it's one of those things which could very well turn the battle in the defenders' favour. Ettenmore's Troll Hunters, more Rhudaur Axemen skulking around with the Enslavers, plenty of armour piercing as you'd expect from Rhudaur, and that won't go to waste against Cardolan by any means. Ferodrum Javelins as well, armour piercing at range and in melee, and yet more cavalry, and again more Coldfell Maidens, so between all three of the Rhudaur armies they do have the cavalry advantage distinctly here, and they've got plenty of quality, but is that going to be enough to overcome the the sheer danger really that the red team have in terms of being 4 attacking armies on a very open map like this? I don't know. It's going to be close, I think. Closer than perhaps a 4v3 on an open plain has a right to be, but let's see, shall we? Let's get the show on the road right from the off. I think there's going to be no need for a cut as the Arthedain cavalry comes sweeping across the hill, I'm sure. I must say, I am very interested to see what these Arthedain sergeants are actually going to be capable of doing, especially considering the rather strong array of cavalry that the hillmen have been blessed with today. If they get anywhere near the Arthedain nobles, they're going to get butchered, and obviously the Coldfell Maidens can also pepper them from afar, and I think the Coldfell Maidens do have an anti-cav bonus in melee as well, so that's really going to make the Arthedain sergeants a bit of a glass cannon, as it were, in melee with the other cavalry, and how much firepower said cannon actually has is also going to be very much in question. But the cavalry is going to be peeling out wide here, perhaps trying to go after the reinforcing army first and foremost. Lindon perhaps are a little bit more well equipped to deal with this sort of situation. They have javelin cavalry of their own. I don't know necessarily if the chariots are going to be what the situation calls for going up against the Arthedain nobles and the like, and the 4 Lindon scouts are also very, very fragile cavalry, whose gimmick is more the fact that they can hide anywhere, so they can be used in ambushes a bit more rather than open field engagements such as this with other forces on horseback. Speaking of which, Lord Belagost is going to be sending his own cavalry over here, unsurprisingly. It's quite rare, I think, that Rhudaur have got such a clear and distinct cavalry advantage. They've got an awkward cavalry force to deal with, I think. Dunedain Mounted Company coming in here. Because of the javelin support and all of the armour-piercing Rhudaur have, they can be a match for anyone, but very often their lower defensive values are what takes them down. You can see how that charge really did ruin the Dunedain Mounted Company. So melee cavalry like this, when they're single HP, certainly have their weaknesses. Meanwhile, charging in now, also cavalry to cavalry, lance to lance, going to be the 4 Lindon scouts going up against another unit of Arthedain nobles. You can see very, very quickly the difference between really one of the most fragile units of cavalry in the game and a unit of multiple HP knights. They got absolutely demolished there on the charge by the Arthedain nobles. The support coming in from the Coldfell Maidens as well. More units here, so yeah, the Lindon cavalry getting mopped up really rather quickly. They do have the support coming in from the Mithlon nobles, and Fire Captain Les McBurney has his rather substantial cavalry force also on the way. Dunedain Mounted Company are broken, no surprises there. They were going to charge forward into the Mithlon Lancers and Chariots, but all of the javelin fire convinced them to move otherwise. The Dunedain Mounted Company were charging in there to some infantry, which, to be fair, this Rhudaur force, as it does try to consolidate with their allies, is a little bit open to attack, and you can see that the Fornoster Rhine Knights are finding gaps in here, and they are doing some damage to some more exposed Rhudaur infantry units, but ultimately it is proving to be a little bit of a tricky encounter for them on horseback. They do have the numbers on horseback to be able to charge in here to a lot of these more exposed units, and forward come the Chariots. Are they going to move in? I think what Seraphim is trying to do here is use up all of the javelins first, which the javelins are very effective, of course, but the Chariots' real danger comes in the fact that they can absolutely hoover through lines. I think actually we're going to have to go down to half speed once again here, as the Arthedain nobles collide with Tintin's advancing Arthedainian troops. We've already mentioned how the ranged contingent of the attackers here is going to be very key, and as the archers start to get into position, we may start to see the attackers have a little bit more joy in forcing Rhudaur onto the back foot a little bit more. But you can see here, Arthedain nobles still causing a lot of trouble. The Arthedain sergeants backing off a little bit, having to jump over their own men. In fact, they're sort of sinking into the ground there. Bit of map geometry strangeness going on. The chariots did actually move in, and it does look as though they have caused a fair amount of upheaval here among the ranks of Rhudaur. Javelins coming from in behind, Coalfell Maidens peppering the location. As they continue to try and mulch through there, spinning their wheels in the mud and blood a little bit, but also infantry units are starting to make their way in now as well. And Dunedain Peacekeepers in the vanguard, exactly the kind of unit, as we said in the composition phases, Rhudaur don't particularly like going up against. And we can see Mithlond Lancers continuing to use their own javelins, and perhaps it's a result of micro being lost in some of these units, but the Coalfell Maidens are just sort of stood there, taking the punishment as it comes. And we have pretty much a large-scale infantry on infantry engagement here on this flank, facilitated really by the aggressive cavalry. Things getting underway here pretty quickly. Rhudaur Axemen, their armour piercing will be fairly useful against some of these rank and file Arthedainian troops, but with the support that Arthedain have, and also the Dunedain units in and amongst here, the lower defensive values of the Rhudaur Axemen are really going to be called into question here, I fear, as the javelins continue to rain down. Victory seems certain so far. As we have a look elsewhere, there is going to be a bit of a cavalry engagement happening out here in front. Arthedain Sergeants and Fornoster Rhine Knights, are they well, they're trying to finish off a very depleted force of Rhudaur Nobles, which they will manage to do, but it has been a fairly costly affair. Elsewhere you can still see Les McBurney's army moving forward, ready to try and engage the rest of the Rhudaur force, which this is a much cleaner engagement so far. Going to be archers moving forward first and foremost, artillery of course raining down upon Cardolan as they move forwards, hitting the Hearthguard and some Dunedain captains, not in huge quantities, but the quality of those kills not in question. And Cardolan, more so really than any of the other armies on the field today, does have that huge ranged presence which they can really bring to bear. And that's what they're going to be trying to do here. In fact, if Rhudaur can be victorious on the other flank, they may be better served trying to take the aggressive route against Cardolan, try and close them down in melee and use a bit of that armor piercing and Rhudaur's general aggression there. For the time being though, simply trading back and forth probably is the way to go. And I'm not sure Rhudaur are going to be victorious on this front either. They're going to try and get some Etenmore's Troll Hunters into position here as well. Frontline Berserkers throwing axes into melee. The Witch Realm Enslavers will make a big difference on the front line actually, and it will be needed now that Arthedain are also pushing their pikemen forward. Plenty of range support coming in here as well. Arthedain really doing the heavy lifting so far. Are we seeing any Lindon infantry? I mean, we're seeing it nearby, but not committed as of yet. Still allowing the cavalry to try and sweep up, including their own cavalry, although the Mithlond Lancers are very far in behind enemy lines. I mean, they're doing a lot of damage and also preventing the Rhudaur archers from returning fire. Rhudaur marksmen are fleeing. Rhudaur swordsman victory seems certain. Coalfell Maidens making a nuisance of themselves. Rhudaur Axemen here just not being able to withstand the sheer numbers that Arthedain are committing forward, so a very aggressive push here from Tintin's wing of the Arthedain army, and it is starting to bear fruit, with the Black Waltz even more dangerous to Arthedain. But when you see the Noldorin Blademasts and some Lindon presence on the front line, it's exactly the sort of thing that units like the Black Waltz will struggle to deal with. As we look elsewhere as well, yeah, Lindon starting to move forward as well. I mean, the momentum is very much on their side. They can crush Diego Rio Ramos' army here if they choose to continue to take this aggressive approach, which means the red team will be in no great rush, I don't think, to be pushing through the middle or on the other flank. All they need to do is continue to shoot into the Rhudaur position, slowly whittle them down, and then once this front line has collapsed, then they can begin their advance in earnest. Lord of Belagos having to send over some reinforcements here, I think, seeing the situation starting to deteriorate. I mean, some extra combatants on the front line certainly won't hurt matters, but basic Rhudaur swordsmen, are they going to be enough to turn this battle around? You can see the front line nobles still causing problems here in the back line, and indeed there are a couple of units off them back here, so the firing lines of Arthedain, which are now very exposed as a result of committing all their infantry forward, are going to be easy pickings, really, for the Rhudaur. Also the Wards of the North taking charges as well. I mean, that is a very good target to be going after. The catapult has ceased firing for the time being. You can see there are actually a fair few dead Cardolan forces now, and not as many, you'd have to say, casualties on the Rhudaur side of the fence. So I don't know whether it's just because Cardolan have been trying to be a little bit stingy with their ammunition, but they are very much in range of these Dunman hunters, and while they may not seem like they're doing a lot of damage, over a longer period of time, even basic archers like this can most assuredly do the business. They continue to try and do their thing, but Cardolan are going to be moving in to be a little bit more aggressive in melee here. Start going infantry on infantry here. I mean, they are moving forward their pikes as well. This would be a good target for the Dunman to go after, actually, with Cardolan being a little bit more standoffish with their own projectiles. You can more easily try and whittle down the amount of pikemen that they have at their disposal. But we do have the first instance of Cardolan infantrymen engaging in melee. Minhiriath spearmen against Rhudaur clansmen, two very similar kinds of units. Of course. With the pike support though, 2 times is going to need to move forward with some extra help as the catapult moving in here, well, the catapult firing in here to try and do its thing. More engagements here with the Minhiriath spearmen. Rhudaur swordsmen sweeping down from the hills. They will help to shore up this front line, most definitely. Meanwhile, still we're at half speed, really, because there's still too much going on to justify going up to 1 speed. Arthedain Sergeant's going to be able to get in here with a nice rear charge, assisting the Nolder and Blade Masters in bringing down the Attenmore's Troll Hunters. Definitely more of a priority to charge into these kinds of units to stop them from firing as quickly as possible. Rhudaur marksman. Arthedain Rangers also in position as well from Lord of Belagos, which, considering the blobbed nature of the front lines over here, which in all honesty look like they're falling apart, so the Rangers may very well have had their part to play, as well as the Javelins, in really demolishing what was the Arthedain-led assault initially. Lindon are going to have to take up the mantle of doing the heavy lifting here. And the 4 Lindon Marines are moving in, but again, they're going into the part of the front line where the Witchram enslavers are, so maybe there is hope yet for the men of Rhudaur. Yeah, Rhudaur swordsmen still there, and Attenmore's Troll Hunters pushing into the backfields as well. I mean, Lindon, you can see, have been certainly a little bit more conservative. Tintin has also got some extra units back here, so that has been in their favour. I mean, at half speed, like I said, it's easy for us to say that really there should have been some cover for these 4 Lindon Marines as the Coalfell Maidens charge into them and do yet more damage to reserve supporting units. But yeah, at full speed things are going to be a lot more frenetic. But still, the cavalry of Rhudaur, while it is damaged from their earlier exertions, you'd have to say that it's not significantly so. Also moving in are the Rhudaur swordsmen. Also starting to, I mean, I'm a little bit surprised honestly that Fire Captain Les McBurney's army is not also moving forwards at this point, because Cardolan are very much in the fray. Their allies on the other side are fighting actually tooth and nail Lord of Balagost has had to send over some reinforcements to keep Diego's army going. So surely that would be the green light for you to move forward and attack at least a slightly under-strength defensive position. Dunman Hunter's now out of ammunition, so they're being committed forward as fodder really for the front line, already wavering. Cardolan, you can see here, have a clear advantage as well in terms of their numbers on the front line. Pike support as well is going to make it very difficult for Rhudaur to do that much damage to Cardolan in melee. Those pikes will force them onto the back foot just that little bit more. Untitled Captain's also present in parts of the line. Exactly the kind of unit which is going to be very, very effective against these hillmen. Further back, Dunedain commanders are still flitting around, Minhiriath archers, sharpshooters. This is also a part to play in this front line where, yes, Cardolan are clearly winning, but it's very difficult to keep track of the arch support, especially the crossbow support. Though that's exactly the sort of thing which, against any faction, once they get situated, it's going to be difficult. Very, very difficult. And I think they're shooting into the backs of this line over here. We are starting to see some of Les McBurney's forces arriving now, some Evendim spearmen trying to help shore up the attack. Throwing axes also being launched overhead by the Troll Shores, going after Evendim archers, trying to at least take away some of the ranged domination that the attackers have been able to enjoy so far. Now they're in range there. Ooh, some good hits there from the catapult. Well, actually not as good as I first thought, but half decent. And then Evendim spearmen also, but again it's more of a token effort this, to just try and keep Cardolan's attack going, I think. The Lord of Balagost is now sort of having to pivot his whole army around, given the fact that Les McBurney seems to be moving to be a more direct supporting force for the Cardolan attack. And then over here, Harlingen Guard fighting on the front line, defeating the Rhudaur swordsmen. Throwing in these tier of units maybe as a sign of some trouble to come. 4 Lindon archers, defeat seems certain for them, but that's not too surprising. They're going up against not 1 but 2 Rhudaur bodyguard tier units, and even if they've both seen a healthy amount of combat at this point, still more than enough to do some good work. 4 Lindon Marines coming in. Still the javelins fall. You can also see that there's also the Wards of the North in here as well. They did well to fight back to a position where they were actually forcing the enemy back here, Rhudaur, but I'm not sure whether they're going to be able to complete the job against what remains from Lindon. Especially not with all those javelins still coming in. Another unit of Wards of the North. The cavalry support as well is all but vanished from Rhudaur's side of the field, allowing the Arthedain sergeants to continue to charge in and continue to do damage against important units. So I have to say, I was interested to see how they would do in this battle, and they have actually been useful, which is crazy. How is such a thing even possible? Victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. Rhudaur swordsmen turning it around against archer units in melee, but a lot of that has to do probably with the close proximity of those Witcher Realm enslavers. Further here, Rhudaur swordsmen doing their thing. Clansmen are there. Still the catapult trying to score some decisive hits, but so far they've been hitting things. It hasn't been useless, but it hasn't got that one nice hit into a giant blob of infantry that Rhudaur I think are going to need now, because they are certainly more and more on the back foot as this fight goes on. A little bit more coming in now from Les McBurney as well. Victory seems certain for his Arthedain men-at-arms. There goes one of the Rhudaur generals, at the hands of the Wardens of the North, no less. No shame in falling to such a strong unit there. Evendim spearmen. The Rhudaur pikes starting to try and reinforce the line as well. That is a lot of javelins and armour-piercing projectiles coming in. Forodrim javelins. Lord of Balagost does still have a line of reinforcements he can commit, and to be fair, they have actually stifled the Cardolan assault. The Rhudaur pikemen instrumental in that, even keeping the mighty Dunedain captains at bay. But Cardolan still have more to give, and I mean, it's mostly archers at this point that Cardolan have left, but they can simply do some damage. It is a decent sort of mini victory that for Rhudaur though. But with Lindon still with more reinforcements on the other side, and with Les McBurney's army still able to commit largely a full assault with higher end infantry units, it's going to be rough on them. Here we can see Rhudaur swordsmen moving forward, fighting evenly actually with the Dunedain peacekeepers for now because of the numbers discrepancy, but the Dunedain are still going to be doing very large amounts of damage to these highly basic swordsmen. Rhudaur clansmen. Again, they're moving forward, trying to take a more aggressive approach, but again, these high damage units like the dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights are going to be so good against the basic units that Rhudaur can field. There's still more peacekeepers left as well, more reinforcements that can be committed forwards. Those Avondham Spearmen and Arthedain Man-at-Arms are routing though. So the first wave of the assault alongside Cardolan has been dealt with really, but I don't know if Rhudaur are going to be capable of doing that again, and they will need to be able to do it again if they are to have any chance of victory. Speaking of which, Diego's army has finally been completely defeated. It is almost exclusively Lindon now, which are going to be moving in from this side. Only going to be a few of Tintin's forces left, and he has very aggressively pushed them forward, once again wanting to be the vanguard of the assault. Again, he's going to be stopped by Rhudain pikemen, just like Cardolan were on the other side. This will give the attackers pause, though surely not enough to reverse their fortunes in this battle. Dismounted Fornos Knights. As they continue to get skewered by those Rhudain pikemen. Lindon Marines getting into a good position. This has been a constant throughout this battle. Lindon being able to do the business with their javelins, and that has been to Rhudaur's detriment. They needed to utterly dominate the throwing projectile game, and Lindon have been able to contest that adequately with them, so that is unfortunate. Rhudaur, their front line's starting to collapse now. I think actually the rotting meat was probably not helping Rhudaur's cause there. They were always more likely to rout in a situation where the momentum was shifting more and more to Arthedain's favour. Which Roman Slavers' victory is a distinct possibility. More javelins coming in, thudding into the Greenway garrison spearmen. Further back, Hearthguard of Amon Sul continue to pile the pressure on. Minhiriath sharpshooters. And the armour piercing that they have in melee is usually quite a nice little extra boost for Cardolan, but less so against this kind of opposition. Maybe a little bit more so against the Asimor's Troll Hunters, but unfortunately it's only the standard Minhiriath archers that have been tasked with engaging them up close and personal like. Rhudaur with what may very well be the final wave of reinforcements they can muster, with some more Rhudaur axemen appearing on the front line, some more Rhudain berserkers. So yet more armour piercing is going to be forthcoming, and the Witchram enslavers moving forward. There's a big blob of Arthedainians here who are completely enveloping the enslavers now. Throwing axes, demolishing their own catapults there. A sign of wasted ammunition, if nothing else, at this point. And again, everything points here to the fact that Rhudaur are ultimately going to be defeated. Forced back to Amon Sul. In doing Angmar's foul bidding, they have only found defeat on the field today by the looks of things. Although Rhudaur, based on the amount of frames that still remain, are going to dig in and make the attackers work for this. Rhudaur marksmen actually defeating the Lindon Marines in melee, which again is a sign of at least in this part of the battlefield, Rhudaur having superior numbers in that engagement. On the front line over here, surely not. Rhudaur marksmen can't be defeating all of these units as well. The Cardolan pikemen definitely having their part to play. I think in terms of outright melee stats, the Mithlond pikemen may be a little bit stronger, but that shield makes the Cardolan pikemen all around just that little bit easier to use and generally that little bit more effective. That was a very weird running animation I just saw in the background there from those Mithlond swordmasters. Surely that will be enough. I mean, there are Reforged javelins in here as well, which may go some way to explaining how the Rhudaur marksmen were having that success, but all of these Rhudaur units now rout. That is going to be that, I think. Dismounted Knights of Illuminus are here. Agalab, I think, is actually going to survive the battle. So even more in favour of good, perhaps, than it was in reality. And the Cardolan Berserkers are trying to flee from that particular fight, but, well, with two bodyguard units over here, with a bit of support coming in from the javelins overhead, they are making life a little bit more difficult for the fire captain here. But again, it is those pikes that are going to mean that even if they do manage to get some good quality and start crunching in at Arthedain's infantry with all that armor piercing, it's still going to be difficult to really make it stick. These Rhudaur axemen, though, are going to defeat these Arthedain men-at-arms, so that unit they had in support in reserve is being put to good use. Further back, Arthedain men-at-arms returning from routing, trying to help soothe that situation. Cardolan as well, struggling a little bit more. They probably had the, in terms of terrain, the most difficult task. More of a gradient that they had to deal with. The fact that they used up all of their ammunition, though, is actually a good sign for Cardolan. Even if they end up losing this fight, it's a sign that they were doing consistent damage with the units around which their army was based. Nice charge into the rear here from the Coldfell Maidens. So, you know, cavalry that was in reserve certainly won't go amiss. There's actually some Lindon units all the way over here as well, so they were sent over to try and bail what remains of Cardolan out. This is a sign of what I was saying. Rhudaur are at the very least making things difficult here as the battle enters its closing phases for the attackers. Well, there goes the Cardolan general, pledging his sword to assist fellow petty kingdom in Arthedain, and costs him his life. Yeah, the fact that Lindon are now sweeping through, though. Lindon really have been the finisher for pretty much all of the engagements on the field that we have seen. Following through from Tintin's initial assaults, defeating Rhudaur up there, here in the middle, doing the same even after Rhudaur looked like they were actually pushing back against Les McBurney's army, and they will do the same ultimately to Cardolan if there's anything of Cardolan left to save come the end of the game. What have we here? Rhudaur axemen. Defeat is a distinct possibility. What was actually a pretty effective use of a basic unit of axemen is certainly going to turn out to be not enough. Slain by the enemy. Defeat seems certain. The enslavers here also. Slowly but surely being slaughtered to a man. Lindon Guard. Still very healthy, so they haven't really been committed up till now. Dismounted Knights of Illuminus in the background as well. Cardolan Berserkers trying to turn around and deal with the Mithlond Marines as they move forwards. Cardolan will have units left alive come the end of the battle after all, though not that many. I don't know if Tintin... Well, Tintin does. He has got his bodyguard units after all, so all of the attackers will have at least something left, albeit far and away the most will probably be the elves of Lindon. Defeat seems certain for the Arthedain berserkers. Still one of those catapults left standing after the withering throwing axe storm that they had to endure. That's going to be it for that front line. So yeah, fairly convincing in the end for the attackers. It does follow what actually happened after all, but the Garlab manages to survive unless he catches a very unfortunate axe blow by what very little remains of the hillman that are still fighting. A few cavalry in the background there, Rhudaur commanders. Another example perhaps of the single HP cavalry not being completely useless this battle, but I mean I still maintain what I say about them. In terms of general play there's no real reason you'd bring them over multiple HP ones, but hopefully with the drawing ever closer next patch, such things will be remedied. And now they flee. Rhudaur Axeman coming back. Lord of Balagost finished. 2 times over here. His final forlorn charge. Rhudaur Axeman actually cover the ground pretty quickly, don't they? Surely they're not going to last too long here. They will land one final charge, one final spit in the eye before the battle inevitably comes to its end. And there we have it. A better victory than it actually was historically. There we have it. So yeah, I like these battles that Lord of Balagost is providing, with a little bit of the context as well. Just because it's a little bit different from the standard large-scale sieges that we often see, a little bit of a palate cleanser in that regard. They're also a little bit easier to record, of course, because they tend to be a little bit shorter, although based on some historical battles and the maps they're inevitably going to be on, I would suggest that that's not going to be universal, nor should it be. Hopefully we will see a few of the longer historical battles as well as these ones, but it's just nice to do one of these where it's yeah, Argaleb is actually one of the captains here, so the game itself new. Arveleg as well, what a name. Cardolan himself deciding to sally forth as well. But yes, a good victory there. Plenty of kills for Rhudaur, but they were always going to be up against it here. This scenario was designed with that in mind. Maybe if they'd used their cavalry slightly better, it could have turned around. Again, javelins. It's very difficult though, because on an open battle like this, it's not really a question of where you choose to make your stand. They tried to consolidate with one another, which was the right thing to do. But I do think that the attackers did a fairly decent job of making sure that Diego was engaged before he could get set into a nice defensive position with Lord of Balagost, so the reinforcements from Lord of Balagost had a little bit to travel before they actually got to the front lines, which, again, these sorts of things will add up to make a difference and make it even more difficult for the hillman to achieve the outcome that they want. Let's see what did the damage for the defenders anyway. So we have good kills on the Arthedain berserkers. The Arthedain pikemen were one of the better performers for Rhudaur as well. You could see the difference that having them on the front line made to all of the engagements that they were in. Arthedain nobles doing nicely as well, but you'd expect that given the level of cavalry that they were going up against. Plenty of units getting well over 100 kills, swordsmen even. Rhudaur marksmen doing decently for Odrum javelins. The Rangers from Lord of Balagost's army, one of them getting 427 on an open field battle like this is very impressive. Most of them probably on the blobs of infantry that Tintin's Arthedain army committed forwards. And Trollshaw Axler is doing it decently as well. So I don't think you can ask for too much more from his army. Maybe some of the infantry could have got a few more kills, but certainly not enough to turn it around. Over here, Berserkers once again doing well. Arthedain nobles doing pretty well. Colfell maidens, depends on what they killed. Again, trying to maintain cavalry dominance is all well and good, but you need to use it well. Enslavers, maybe less impressive on the infantry here. Maybe you want a little bit more from them, especially from the Rhudaur Axemen with their armour piercing. But again, they're going to be a very obvious target for archers, and on a map like this, there's only a limited amount you can do to protect them from that. Black Walls, one of them doing acceptably, one of them dipping below 100 kills is not what you need to be seeing. Rhudaur Marksman doing far less well over here. And the final army, plenty getting over 100 here. The catapult maybe, I mean 106 isn't really enough from a catapult in this situation, but again, open field, more difficult to bottle the attackers up and get those really good hits that you're going to want. Rhudaur Swordsman, mixed fortunes for them. 9 kills on Coldfell Maidens isn't really enough, but again, it is what it is. A valiant effort from Rhudaur to try and change the past, but ultimately it will not happen now, and indeed actually it has gone even more against them that Argaleb managed to survive his brush with death, shall we say. But yeah, big thank you to Lord of Balagost for continuing to make these, and big thanks to all the players as well for helping him to run them. Anyone that he sends me in the future will of course find its way onto the channel at some point or another. Now, the situation for me has developed somewhat recently. I'm not sure still how it's going to end up, but at the very least things have started to move, and things may start to move very, very quickly. I will keep people informed of the situation as it develops, of course, but it's kind of a stressful situation, to be honest with you. I was hoping that it would be a lot more straightforward than it has ultimately turned out to be, but we'll see. It's a difficult one, honestly. Yeah. Just keep posted. I will be posting an update on it at some point. I don't think it's going to be a live stream, unfortunately, as much as I've been banging on and on about doing a live stream for quite a while now. I don't think it's going to be that, because I think when I need to make the update, it's just going to have to be sort of a quick thing, whether that be a video form or whether it be a community post, as it has been when I've gone away for my trips away for work over the course of the past year and 3 quarters. Yeah, it's one of those. We'll see. There's still things that can change, but a little bit clearer now on what's going to be happening. So hopefully we can get through a little bit of a strange period and normal service can be resumed. I don't think the schedule will be interrupted too much, but we'll see. Like I said, I'll post an update if and when it becomes necessary. So yeah, big thanks to all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.